All right, so video 4 here, we're going to add a couple small features that'll just be nice. So right now what we have is we have a timer that will start at 30, go down to 0, and then say, hey, game over, and then a couple seconds later, the game is for real over. You can't play anymore. And then you can click the green flag and restart, right? One thing we want to add to the game is this is kind of something you'll notice, especially with old games, is when the timer counts down in an old game, a lot of times there are ways you can make the timer go up. So maybe one thing we can do that's very simple is say, hey, every time you shoot the robot, let's add a little bit of time. Now we want to make it to where if you shoot the robot and we say add 10 seconds, well, very quickly, you see how quickly I'm shooting that robot. I mean, we'll get to like infinity time, right? I mean, just to the point where it's like the game is too easy now. If we say add 1 second, I don't know if that's going to be challenging enough. So here's what I'm thinking. And we can experiment with this. And then in your version of the game, you can do whatever you want. You're like, hey, every time you shoot the robot, add 100 seconds. I mean, go for it, okay? But I'm going to come up with what I think is a good idea. But then your game, you can change it up however you want. And that's kind of the beauty of this is you can remix this. So let's do this. In here, where we say, so I'm going to be in the crosshair code. Because right now we got this thing where it says, hey, when I receive, so remember, we're going back, boy, thank goodness we named this very simply. Inside the crosshair code, we said, when I receive shoot, when I get the message that the user pressed the spacebar key and that they're shooting at the bad guy, if the crosshair is touching bad guy, then change the score by 1. We're going to add to this part right here. We're not going to change score by 1. We're going to leave that alone. We're going to go back to variables, and we're going to say change. How about time remaining? Now, what I want to do is instead of giving the person like 1 whole second and being like, you get a bonus second every time you hit the bad guy, I'm going to use a decimal. 5th graders, you should know what decimals are. 4th graders, depending on what part of the school year it is, you should probably know what decimals are. 3rd graders and below, you're just going to have to trust me on this. We're going to use what's called a decimal. The very basic way to explain this is a decimal is just a fancy way to write a fraction. So if 1 means 1 whole second, maybe I want to add half of a second, right? So take a second, cut it in half, we're going to add half second. To write a half as a decimal, once again, if you don't know what this is, just take my word on it. We're going to write point. You cannot see it because it's too small, but there is a little period right there. That's what I mean by point. So period 0.5. I know it's so small. Not 5. Period 0.5. Change time remaining by period, which means 0.5. That means we're going to add a half a second. If we are shooting at the bad guy and we hit him, give the player a half second extra. Now, we could also be mean. We could say, hey, if you miss the bad guy, not only are we going to take away from your score, but we could take away from your time. We're not going to do that, but we could if we wanted to. Now, I already am going to predict that this is the fun thing about coding is you'll do something like, okay, that makes sense to me, and it will break something in the game. We're going to try an experiment. I bet I just broke our game. And I know how to fix it. So we're going to press go. I'm going to do something. I'm going to shoot our bad guy once. Okay. See how it says 26.5? That means you have 24 and a half seconds left. Now I'm going to let this run down. Watch what happens. I'll make a prediction while this is happening. My prediction is our game will now never end. And I know why. We coded this to say, hey, if time remaining equals 0, then say game over. Watch this. Time remaining will never be 0. 1.5, 0.5, negative 0.5, negative 1.5, negative 2. See, when we did that add a half second thing, we got rid of the number 0. So Scratch is like, okay, when time remaining equals exactly 0, then say game over. Well, we just introduced a big bug into our game, didn't we? Now we said, well, it didn't equal 0, so don't end the game. Okay, I'm going to press the stop button. That's the sort of stuff that makes coding really hard. Something that worked earlier, now it doesn't work anymore. And if you think about it, logically, I knew the error was going to happen. But if I didn't know that, I'd be like, I don't know why the game didn't stop. This is what makes coding and programming so tricky. And there's tons of times I do something and I'm like, wait, why doesn't this work anymore? And I have to go back up and figure it out, right? So if you keep coding, you'll get to the point where you'll start to anticipate those things, like, oh, I bet that's going to break. But you'll still have times to be like, why isn't this working anymore? And you have to back up. And so let's back up. Okay, we can fix this. Time remaining equals 0. We need a different, we call it an operator. We're going to now say, instead of if, so I'm going to take this time remaining equals 0. I'm going to drag it out of here. Time remaining equals 0. We're going to change it. We're going to say this guy right here. You see that little kind of like V, sideways V thing? We call that a less than operator. So I'm in operators. I'm going to say, hey, instead of time remaining equals 0, we're going to say time remaining is less than, not 50. I don't know why it starts with 50. 0. Now I'm not saying, hey, look and see if it's exactly 0. We're just going to say, hey, the moment the game goes less than 0, so that could be any negative number, then we're going to say game over. Now this time I'm going to be smart. When we start the game, I'm going to go to the bad guy code. I'm going to set time remaining to 5 seconds just so I can test this. I'm not going to wait 30 more seconds. I don't have time. So let's press the green flag. Oops, green flag. Okay, here we go. Time remaining 5. Okay, there are 4. Okay, 3.5, 2.5, 1.5, 0.5. Game over. Now it worked. Okay, now I'm going to go back to 30 seconds. All right, so now I've made it to where when we play the game, okay, we can shoot the bad guy. Oh, I just lost. Oh, no, I missed him. Right off the bat, I missed him. Okay, now if you notice, I'm playing the game. I can shoot the bad guy, but the timer is still going down, right? So the best I can do is add like a half second each time I shoot him, right? So the timer is still going to end up at 0. I'm just never going to be able to, I guess I could spam the shoot button, but, oh, see, like, okay, now there's this stress. I'm like, I got 15.5 seconds, 15, 15.5, 14.5, 15. Oh, gosh. Okay, the timer will eventually get to 0, but now I give the user at least the feeling of like, oh, I can keep playing if I just go fast enough, right? Okay, I'm going to stop right here. Okay, that's kind of cool. Now you can play with the time. You can say, hey, in the crosshair code, you can say, hey, instead of adding changing time remaining by 0.5, you could try it differently. You'd be like 0.2 or 0.7 or whatever. You can also be mean. You can say, hey, if they miss, because remember this down here says, hey, if the cursor or if the crosshair is touching the bad guy, give them this time. You can be mean. You can say, hey, if they miss, if they're down here and we're taking away, you can take away their time too. You can say, hey, take away -1 second. You can be like, yeah, you miss him, it's going to cost you, right? Oh, look at that. Every time I miss, I'm losing a second now. Game over. Sorry, duder. Okay. So this is your game now. You can do with it what you will. Now let's add one other thing. This is just a real quick thing. Right now we're playing in what I call purgatory. Purgatory means like there's nothing around the bad guy. It's just a white, empty field. That's kind of boring. Add a backdrop. It won't. It shouldn't change anything about your game other than just the setting of where it's happening, but it will make the game look so much better. Now, because I called mine Space Shooter, and if you ask me why in the first video, why did you call it Space Shooter? I'd be like, I don't know, I just did. I'm going to go with outer space. You can pick whatever background you want. If you want to have the bad guy be at the baseball stadium, whatever. I like the space backgrounds. They've got some pretty cool ones here. I'm kind of a simple man. I see a galaxy, I always click on it. Okay, so I'm going to press the green flag, and now I got my bad guy in outer space, right? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Okay, so in the next video, we'll put some nice polishing things on here, and you're getting to the point now where this is yours. You can now start messing with the numbers and changing things and testing things out. Maybe you want to add a second bad guy. Maybe you have two bad guys flying around the screen. I mean, I don't. Maybe you want to have a power up. Maybe you want to add a sprite to where it's like, hey, a little apple pops up. If they shoot the apple, you get 10 bonus seconds. I mean, you can add all sorts of crazy things, right? We'll do another video. We'll add a couple just nice polishing things on there, and then we'll think about some final steps.